Welcome to Diary of an Alcoholic. My name is John. This is a show about alcoholism, recovery, and mental health. Sit back, relax, well, let's talk about it. Buckle up. This is episode 2, Pills for the Pills. Thank you so much for joining me. During the last episode, I talked about the sudden anxiety, panic, and depression that overwhelmed me shortly after getting sober. In this episode, we're going to dive into the rabbit hole of medications that were, in my opinion, misprescribed to me. Now, before I get started, I want to be clear. During this episode, it will sound like I'm bashing and downplaying the effects of psychiatric medications, but I assure you that is not my intention. I'm simply telling you about my experience, and maybe it can help you make better informed decisions. I'm also going to be discussing my psychiatric visit experience and my therapy experiences briefly. But again, these were my experiences. They may sound embellished, but please just take them in the spirit for which they're intended. As the anxiety started to ramp up and the depression really kicked in, I went to go see my primary doctor. Listen, I really like my doctor. Him and I would like to think are pretty good friends. We were stationed in the same place, not at the same time, but at the same camp in Kuwait. He's a 5-tour combat surgeon. He's a badass dude. And he provides really good family health. But when it comes to the mental side of things, he doesn't seem comfortable at all. Or maybe that's just how our healthcare system operates. A patient talks about something that is not in your wheelhouse, simply point them to a specialist. I'm not sure how it works, but anyway. I asked him if there was a medication that might work for my situation, and he replied with, "Well, what would you like to do?" So I said, well, I had seen a commercial for Zoloft, the one with the little cartoon guy that was sad until he took the pill and then he got happy. And I said, I don't know, is that something that might work for me? And he said, sure, let's give that a shot. We'll give you a dose and we'll monitor from there. And we proceeded. And you know what? Right then and there, I felt really good about the decision. I felt like, oh man, this is going to be the path to fixing whatever the hell was going on in my clown show of a brain. So I started on a low dose of Zoloft. Zoloft is an SSRI, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It essentially works by blocking the reuptake of serotonin so that more of it is available to act on receptors in the brain, supposedly. I say that because recently the medical community has admitted that they don't truly understand how or if it works how they originally thought. SSRIs and SNRIs take 4 to 8 weeks to take full effect. So when you make an adjustment or you switch the medication, there's a huge trial and error period to deal with. It's pretty mind-boggling, no pun intended. And let me back up real quick. I mentioned SNRIs. That stands for serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, which we'll discuss later in this episode. Roughly 2 weeks into the Zoloft ride, I started to feel sort of better. but different. Let me explain. The anxiety symptoms seem to have lessened, but the panic still lingered in the shadows. If I thought about having a panic attack, then the panic attack would rapidly pop its head up and say, "You thought about it? Let's do this." I'm not sure if I was still depressed or not, because looking back on it, I was actually more emotionally dulled than anything. So after about 6 weeks into the Zoloft journey, I finally got a visit with my psychiatrist. She made it quite clear during our intake session that she would be primarily managing my medication management, but she wasn't there to provide talk therapy. It was important for me to continue my scheduled talk therapy sessions with my counselor. During that visit, we briefly discussed what had happened up to that point, and I told her how I was feeling with the Zoloft thus far. She recommended that we increase the dosage, so she essentially doubled it. This is where my medication path started to go downhill. Unbeknownst to me, the Zoloft simply didn't go well with my brain chemistry. The depression got worse. The anxiety and panic seemed to intensify, while at the same time, I wasn't feeling joy, anger, or sadness, but I was living in despair. After about another 6 weeks of letting the new dose of Zoloft bake in, I met with my psychiatrist and begged her for help. I cried. I was desperate. So, she switched me to Prozac. Okay, I could spend an hour discussing the timeline and the bake-in periods, coupled with an emotional roller coaster ride, suicidal ideation, and sexual dysfunction, but I'll summarize it like this. Zoloft turned to Prozac. A mood stabilizer was added to the Prozac. That led to the move to Effexor and an antipsychotic, and then to Wellbutrin with a mood stabilizer and an anticonvulsant. My mind was an absolute mess. I needed to get out of this cycle, so I quit. Against my doctor's advice, I quit the 3 pills cold turkey and went through some wicked withdrawals for about 5 weeks. The withdrawals were the heaviest, I think, from the Effexor, which is the norepinephrine and serotonin reuptake inhibitor. My mind was like an electrical storm. I would move my eyes to the left or right and I would get shocked. It was tragic. It was really difficult to get through. But after around 5 weeks, guess what? I finally found a baseline. And it turns out my baseline was pretty damn good. So in effect, I had gone from 30 years of hard drinking to sobriety and straight into medication. I guess if I could do it again, I would tell myself to just let the anxiety, panic, and depression wash over me for a few weeks. I think it was my brain's way of purging, cleansing my soul and body. But I stopped the process by over-medicating. On next week's episode, I'll be discussing the revelations from talk therapy and how it helped and how it didn't. Be sure to join me. Thank you so much for listening.